Welcome back to another episode of Sal and Pals Go to the Movies. This is another Throwback Thursday review, and I'm here with my friend Touly. Say hi, Touly.
Hi, everyone.
And today we're going to be reviewing Raging Bull from 1980. And just a fair warning, there's going to be spoilers up ahead, so you've been warned. The life of a boxer, Jake LaMotta, whose violence and temper led him to the top inside the ring, but destroys his life outside of the ring. If you want information about this movie, click on the link below for cast and information. So let's start off my review by going down my pros. I'm going to start off by saying that this is based off a real boxer and a book that he wrote about his life, an autobiography. Robert De Niro basically read this while he was filming The Godfather, and he fell in love with the story, and he pushed for Martin Scorsese to make this movie. So in a sense, the credit goes to Robert for pushing for this film to be made, and he also started it. So I really want to push that emphasis that this movie, when you watch it, just keep in mind that this is a real person. You're kind of watching his life progress. What also amazes me is the chemistry between Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci in this movie. They play brothers. One is the fighter and one is just basically, I guess, acting manager. To me, it seems like they actually did hit it off. In the sense they did. They're good friends and they've been acting side by side in a few movies. In this movie, and it does drive it home that the fighter, basically, he's the one who's taking all the hits in the ring, and then when he comes out, he's still getting hit with life. So it's a struggle, and I really enjoyed how they filmed this. I found it aesthetically pleasing to the eye, and the way they used the cameras. They didn't move much of the camera movement. For example, there's a scene where camera's behind one of the characters and Robert is looking into the camera while the character's facing away from the camera, but there's a mirror in the back that shows the other character. So in a sense, the camera doesn't have to move much. They took a lot of effort to basically minimize the camera movements in some scenes of the film. The next thing is that I really enjoyed how they used the camera inside the ring to show that how simple it was for basically Jake to have a fight. Inside the ring is simplistic. It's just him and the opponent. It's very open, high energy, high pace, but at the same time, he knows what he's doing. He knows how to get it done. But then the big thing is when he comes out of the ring. Every time we see him outside of the ring having a normal time with his family or at a club, it's very crowded, a lot of people, a lot of talking, basically chaotic, and he doesn't know, or the character doesn't know how to deal with this. So in a sense, for him, it seems like real life is the hardest versus the fighting. And yes, I want to touch upon why Jake, the real Jake, had this temper, is that he was deaf in 1 year. I think it was he couldn't hear from 1 ear, and the other one, he still had like some hear loss. So technically, that's why he had a temper, because he would always feel that people were talking and he couldn't understand if they're talking about him or against him. So he would get really mad. And when he would ask somebody, like, what'd you say? You know, they took it like, what are you trying to do? Pick a fight with me or something? So even when they show the scene of his wife, when he says, well, what'd you tell him? Even if it was really close, it's like, you heard it, you know, I just said this. And like, no, you tell me. So the whole thing about this is that it doesn't really talk about the deafness in his ear, even though that doesn't really mean that we should give him an easy pass for violence. But that could have basically changed the movie for me in a bit. But at the same time, I would have probably added it into one of the fights, maybe cause the ear bleed or something. And that's where, you know, he starts losing his hearing at the beginning of the movie when the first fight where he loses. But that's just me. And then another interesting fact is that during the kitchen scene at the beginning of the movie where Joe Pesci is, you know, arguing with Robert and Robert tells him to, you know, punch him in the face, they were really hitting each other. They were punching each other for reals. And during the movie, I saw it and I was like, oh, this is kind of pretty interesting, but I didn't know if it was real or not until basically I started looking into it. And I think it's on the DVD commentary, and Martin says that he saw them hitting each other, or he said go ahead and hit each other, and they started hitting each other a little harder, and he kept on rolling or something, and he kept it in. Also, in one of the fights where they're sparring, Robert actually breaks Joe Pesci's ribs, or one of his ribs, as they're sparring, and it made it into the film because they actually cut away from it. Yeah, they did get injured in the movie, so Now, another thing is that's really interesting is that I'm going to try to link this movie with Psycho, and you guys will get to see this a little further down the line. One of the things that I linked this movie to Psycho is they use chocolate syrup because it was filmed in black and white, and Hershey's chocolate syrup was used in Psycho in the shower scene to replace the blood. It actually gives a color on black and white similar to the tone of blood, does drip like blood. So in this movie, they also used the chocolate syrup in the fight scenes to illustrate the blood scene because Martin Scorsese did not want to use anything else that would be too loosely based on water kind of thing. So in that sense, he kind of took notes from the movie Psycho. Now moving on to my cons, this movie was close to 2 hours long, and to me, it seems like it was kind of stretched out a bit. I mean, it did range from 1941 to 1964, and we saw those timelines basically get pointed out by significant fights. Yes, I understand that this is a fighter's career, but at the same time, do we really need to illustrate all these fights? Not necessarily that they are important or are not important in a sense, but you can wrap this up in a little better tightly fit by omitting some other things that, you know, are just lingering there. 2 hours for a film, to me personally, like 2 hours is okay, but I know other people who prefer it to be a little shorter, and that's why I'm putting this as a con in my book, I guess, for other people. The other thing that I just really wanted to omit from this movie was the ending Bible quote. It doesn't really fit in there. I mean, a lot of people might see that this movie is a movie of redemption for the fighter, but at the same time, it's not really needed. So I would just omit it. The last thing, how I'm going to connect this to Psycho, is that in the last fighting scene, Martin Scorsese didn't know how to shoot the film or how to shoot the fight. So what he did was that he took the shower sequence from Psycho and he used the shot list from that movie, 1960 Psycho, because he didn't know how to shoot this, because it was, for him, in his mind, this was the most horrific scene of the movie, the last fight. So with that, I'm going to pass this on to Touly and see how he saw this movie and for his final grade.
So I wasn't aware that this film was based off a book, which then of course was based off a true story. But with that being said, my opinion of this film is going to be based on the movie as a standalone project versus it being a depiction of what happened in reality, so that I could sort of drive home a couple of the points that I'm going to make. First and foremost, Jake, I found his character to be polarizing because of the way they depicted his temper in this film. To me, it wasn't clear enough, or it wasn't sort of hammered down enough to the point where it made me feel whether or not his temper was the result of him boxing and the amount of blows that he was taking to the head, which is something that's commonly addressed in these sort of films. You know, concussions, brain damage that would cause some sort of mental disturbance or some sort of after effect as the result of getting hit too much in the head. I wasn't quite sure whether or not the way he acted was the result of him just from years of boxing, or was he already like this to begin with? Because that sort of, to me, would allow me to sort of sympathize for his situation one way or the other. Then I could sort of connect the dots between him and his brother, who Sal mentioned sort of acted like his manager. Joey, his brother, was always on his side. Like, he wanted the best for his brother. He wanted him to succeed in boxing. He would do anything to get, Jake to become the middleweight champion. It sort of felt that Joey would push Jake to a sort of extreme to achieve that, even if it meant dropping a fight to that degree, to which is something that Jake was very against, because he struggled in that fight to even convince the audience that, he wanted to go down. And because of that, he got suspended before returning to the ring. It frustrated Jake to the degree of him, crying, as shown in one of the scenes after the fight, because it was in his nature to just give up like that. It kind of circled back to my idea of Jake being a polarizing character. If this was something as a result of like his family or his friends pushing him too hard to become something that he's not, I could sort of root for him a bit more because of that. But if instead there was already this notion that he already was this type of person to, before boxing that is, who had this temper problem, then it made me not really want to root for Jake in the sense, because he was constantly abusing the people around him, either verbally, to his initial wife that we saw, who was frustrated with him because he was never home, or when he wasn't very kind to her. Even to Vicky, who became his wife later, I kind of realized where that relationship was going to go, because it was only a matter of time before Vicky herself realized who Jake was and how he was going to treat her. And it totally makes sense that, she left him at the end of the film, or towards the end of the film, as well as his brother Joey, who Jake questioned the integrity of when he asked whether or not he slept with Vicky. That was something that was sort of like a pro and a con in terms of where they wanted to take the movie, because it made me not want to root for Jake, but at the same time, it made me want to not hate him too much as well. I personally feel that by the end of the film, he didn't really change too much from who he was from the beginning, in that he was still the guy who was going to do whatever he wanted. And for him to have opened up a nightclub like he did, for him to behave in such a way that would still hurt the people around him, where I thought at that point he would strive to be a better person and treat Vicky and his family with more respect, but decides to still pull off the antics that he did. It's things like that where it feels like maybe he could have taken 2 steps forward instead of 2 steps back. Each time I felt like he was going to change for the better. Aside from what Sal already mentioned about the cinematography, the sort of effects they were using in this film, to me, it was really the characters who I was really interested in seeing how they reacted to one another. I didn't feel like it was enough for me to get behind any of the characters. Like even Vicky, who I thought was going to leave him after that brutal incident between Jake and Joey, in which she got involved in as well. For her to have stayed around for as long as she did, and then to leave him later just to realize that, oh, I guess I was right earlier to have come to the conclusion that I should have left this guy earlier, but instead I decided to stay a bit longer for who know what reason that made sense at that point, because at that point I already comprehended the situation enough for her to have left. It made total sense, just for her safety, and I think at that time they already had one kid too, so for the kid's safety as well. It was quite frustrating to see Jake go through what little transition he did throughout the film. It kind of revolved back to, again, the idea of whether or not his behavior was the result of him boxing or just who he was as a person, because I was struggling to, lean on one side too much versus the other, because the movie didn't do enough to push me to one side more strongly than the other. So I was always in this constant battle of, okay, maybe it's because of boxing, or no, maybe this is just who he is. So I kept on just going back and forth like that. And because of that, I was just stuck in the middle of who Jake was. Like I was neutral about his character. I didn't want to support him, but at the same time, it's like I was trying to come up with reasons to sort of define why he was doing what he was doing. Other than that, I would say my other con about the film is the length of it. I mean, I normally say this, but given the story that they were trying to tell, I felt like this was one of those films where they could have done it in lesser time and still come up with the same sort of impact that it delivered at the end of the film. I think overall, like the main characters, between Jake, Vicky, Joey, even some of the mafia characters that were in this film, I mean, they did enough to sort of made me understand what was going on in the overall picture. I wish there was more context so that I could sort of see where each of these characters were coming from. For example, if Joey came to the realization that maybe he was pushing his brother way too hard, that it was due to his encouragement that was blindsiding him from the truth that maybe Jake is becoming more and more mentally and physically distressed because he kept on putting him into these sort of fights or these sort of situations. Things of that nature. I wish there was more context so that we could sort of see these characters fleshed out and be more dimensional. So yeah, my final grade, it's probably not going to be as favorable as what most people would look at this movie as, because I think it is sort of like a classic, but given what I said, I'm going to give the film a 6 out of 10.
So yeah, I agree with you when you said that the characters don't have a lot of merit. I think that's what you're going for. Jake, like I said, the only way I could have fixed this was by introducing his hearing loss. It would have gotten progressively worse as he kept on fighting. I mean, that's another sense of what you were saying, like taking hits to the head. It takes a toll. Joey, his brother, was acting manager. So also when he through the fight, I would have liked it if his brother would have been like, show a little remorse, like, hey, I pushed him. It's because of me, because he threw the fight. And, this is the reason why, we're getting this backlash now. I guess the characters did not win me over, like Touly said. But everything else about the movie, like I said, it's pleasing to the eye. I liked how they filmed it. So my grade is basically going to be a little higher than Touly. It's going to be a 7 out of 10. I think the reason is because I enjoyed the chemistry between the two actors, Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci. This does it for this review of Raging Bull. Please join us next time when we're going to review Breakfast Club.
Questions?
Yeah, I got a question. Does Barry Manilow know that you raid his wardrobe?
Give you the answer to that question, Mr. Bender, next Saturday. Don't mess with the bull, young man. You'll get the horns.
Please like, comment, and subscribe. You can find our social media links below. And like always, keep watching movies.